You're listening to the New York Said podcast.
Fear not, my friends. This will be my greatest performance.
Give it to me.
Here we go. We came, we saw, we kicked its ass.
Hello.
Hello, what's up, Bruce? This is Aman.
Aman, hi, how are you?
I'm doing well. How's everything on your end?
Yeah, very good. Lovely to hear from you.
Excellent. I really just want to start off by congratulating you. I'm hearing all the buzz about Field of Light at Freedom Plaza. How's everything going with that?
Yeah, it's really exciting. I mean, it's my first exterior show in New York, so I'm very excited by that. It's an unusual venue for me because we're normally in kind of botanical gardens and museums.
And you're right by the United Nations, like right next door. Like that's iconic.
That's amazing for me. The beautiful thing is, for me, the Field of Light has sort of sprung from, very important roots in terms of the connection with the land out in Australia. And since it first was started or inspired, back in 92, my heart was always the feeling of connecting with the landscape and with the ground. I know it sounds really a little bit cliche, but it was very true and deep feelings. When I put the first iteration 10 years later in our field here, where I live, I got this feeling that it was something that was much bigger than me, in terms of what it meant, and it kind of did its own thing. I kind of think I'm a bit of a gardener in that sense. I've just sort of found a seed in a sort of magical seed in the desert, and I planted it. And over the last 20 years, it's done some incredible things. But I put a bit of water on it and tended it and taken care of it and sent it on its own way.
I love how you've had all these various iterations of it, from the Don's Flamingos and Ramadu's Table to Gone Fishing. Like it has various points of inspiration. Can you talk about, because I don't think it's cliche to be inspired, whether it's by a desert or by a book or or by a moment in time with family. Can you dive deeper into that?
Yeah, of course. Actually, the Field of Light, the works you mentioned were a completely different installation.
I meant your work in general.
Yeah, but you're quite right. The journey started for me in 92, in the sense that I came back from that trip in Australia. I'd lived there for 8 years. And when I decided to give art my full emotion, full time, was when my dad died in 99. I was just 40, and it occurred to me that I needed to do something that was meaningful. And it wasn't, it wasn't all about the self. It was about doing something a little bit more and sharing it with other people. And I then realized from that moment in Uluru, when I had that experience about the Field of Light, I kind of realized that I had a lot of stories that I'd been writing in my sketchbooks, or of moments of what I call clarity, where you either it was sitting in a landscape or walking in a landscape or reading a book or listening to a piece of music. And if it really resonated, I would just make a quick note in my book, not thinking of it was going to be a piece of art. I just did it as a recording about feeling good about the world, about that kind of moment in time. And up to that point, I always thought that making art was really quite self-indulgent and quite selfish. And I then decided, actually, that if the subject matter was something you could share with people, it was no longer self-indulgent. You could actually make art without feeling that you were just being self-centered and talking about yourself. You were actually talking about experiences that you'd had, which other people would get because they'd had them as well.
Absolutely.
And I think really for me, that's what art is. It's a language. It's a great way to communicate a feeling, an emotion to other people and share that as much as we all share things together.
I mean, it's one thing to have a vision and to write things down, but all the, creative problem solving that has to go into making that idea tangible, because the materials that you're using, they look extraordinary at night, but I'm sure in daytime it looks phenomenally complex.
Well, again, that's the fun of it. I think that my grandfather, or one of my grandfathers, was an engineer. I sadly wasn't born with a lot of academia in me, but I was always fascinated by the world around me and how things went together. So I had part of my interest lay in the way materials work, the way things go together. And as a kid, I'm of that era where kids were typically playing with toys like Meccano, like Lego. I mean, kids play with Lego now. I was always kind of cutting boxes up if your mum went shopping. All the boxes that cereals were in and eggs were in, and you spent a lot more time in those days amusing yourself, cutting things up, sticking things together,
and taking things apart. I know I took quite a few TVs and Nintendos apart, got in trouble for it.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, one of the things that really fascinated me as a kid was the old valve radios. Not that I was from that era, but my grandparents were. And if we ever went to see our grandparents, they'd have those very old radios that kind of lit up.
Yep.
You were asking me about the inspiration, but one piece I did recently, a number of years ago, but it was called SOS, and that was all based on my childhood memories of listening to cricket on the radio. It's a British sport, but we obviously were great test matches against Australia and the West Indies and India. And when they radio did broadcasts from those countries, often the commentary came through the night. I'd be a child in my bedroom, or if I was at school away, and I would turn a radio on, and it would all light up. All the dials would light up, and you kind of thought you were, listening to these voices across the world. It was just magical. You sort of couldn't believe in those days that you could listen to somebody on the other side of the radio,
right?
Making commentary about a game of cricket. That inspired another installation. So you never know where the inspiration's coming from. It's so varied.
Yeah, shout out to Marconi.
Yeah.
The thing that throws me and just moves me is your choice of material. Field of Light at Freedom Plaza has approximately 17,000 pieces of fiber optic. How did you come to fiber optic and the materials that you use?
Well, because I really like playing. And I tell you, there's a really simple story behind that. When I first had this experience in Australia, I was thinking of ways, how do you describe a feeling? As I said, we were traveling around Australia in an old car we bought. We were leaving Sydney. We put a tent in the back of the car and a few bits and pieces, and off we went. And when we stopped at Uluru, I had this sort of feeling that the land and the sky and it's the middle of the desert there. Everything is red. I felt just incredibly alive, so alive. And I couldn't really describe, you can explain it to people, but you can't really describe. And I just felt I was plugged into the grid, like I was being charged by it was like the air was buzzing. And it was only later on I kind of thought about it and thought, well, it must be deserts are places where when it rains, you get this incredible speed of growth. And I just thought there was this energy in the land and in the sky. And I promise you, this was, I hadn't, it wasn't like I was being stimulated by other substances.
Oh yeah, on ayahuasca, on shrooms. No, this is all natural.
I mean, I wish I had, but I wasn't. I was, while I was thinking of that, I was trying to think of how I would express that. And I knew it wasn't going to be a two-dimensional piece. I knew it had to be an immersive piece, something that surrounded you, you walked into. And in fact, I spent most of that trip trying to imagine how I could create something at night for when you stopped your car, because often you stop with the daylight going down and you pitch your tent, cook something, and then you go to bed and read a book for a little bit, and literally you do then go to bed. And I thought, well, wouldn't it be fun to create an installation that lit up, and it kind of was inspired by the landscape that you were traveling through. And that was really the whole essence of the field of light. And then eventually, when I got back to the UK and I settled and I started experimenting with light, I came across fiber optics because I was experimenting, making things for different projects. And I thought, that might be the materials to make my field of light. And it took me 10 years to get from the idea to putting it in our field. By then we bought an old rundown farmhouse. It had a field in front of it where I didn't have to ask anybody's permission to do this experiment. So it took us, about 10 years. And actually, the truth behind it is that I borrowed some money off our mortgage. It was meant to be paying for the curtains and the carpets in our house. And my poor wife said to me, what's that out in the field? And I said, oh, well, it's this experiment. She looked at me, she said, and who's paying for that? And I sort of had to come clean. Yeah, I was not the most popular person for a while, but I told her, look, I'll never do it again. Please trust me. I seriously haven't. I said, I just had to get this idea. I said, it's been 10 years. And I said, I think I've been really patient to wait 10 years. Anyway, that was 24 years ago. So I think we've done okay.
This project is so nostalgic. Like, I haven't walked through it and I can't wait to walk through it in the winter. But it took me back to when I was a kid. My mom would take us to Madison Square Garden and we would go to Barnum and Bailey Circus and they would buy you this fiber optic toy that had lights that would shoot through it and you would shake it and it would change colors. And it might have been $5. I don't remember, but like I hadn't thought about that in 30 years until I started like looking at your artwork and looking at, all the various projects and the materials that you use.
Well, it's interesting you say that because I think I see the world through the lens of a child. I always have done. I mean, I'm 64 now, but I still have that sense of wonder. And my mum and dad had, sadly they divorced, but before they got divorced, and luckily they got a happy divorce, I remember this Christmas tree we used to have as a child, and fairy lights, or Christmas lights we called them. I mean, they're called fairy lights in the UK. I don't know what you call them. They're the little lights you put on trees. Mm-hmm. I was given the job at a very young age to actually test all the lights. And I don't know if you can remember this.
Yeah, if one didn't work, they all didn't work.
Exactly. And I was the only one in the family. I bought myself a little 12-volt battery. Wow. And I used to then take the bulb out individually and test them. I mean, I must have been very OCD as a kid. I probably still am.
I feel like certain things like that aren't by accident. I feel like that's where your journey with light, like one of your earliest epiphanies, before you even knew it, you started at that point.
Absolutely. And I'll tell you another thing is, in those days, I mean, I don't want to sound like I'm ancient. I was born in 59. So in the 60s, I remember going to the cinema and seeing Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, the original Disney one, mm-hmm. and the great old ones like Dumbo, the Aristocats, all those. You went once to the cinema, literally, and that was all you could get.
Yeah, never saw it again for years.
Yeah, and I used to go there, and I was like a piece of blotting paper. I would just absorb that screen, and the color of the film, those wonderful Disney landscapes, and the artistry was just, for a kid, it was just took you there. And I would then spend hours drawing. Sometimes you get references off a poster or something like that, or a book, but you would just draw and draw, those kind of landscapes. I particularly remember the Aristocats that, have a great love of music. And the Aristocats had this wonderful scene of the cats all jamming away in some attic in Paris. I don't know if you've ever seen that film.
I have, years ago.
Oh, my God. it's still the way the sound and the way they created this kaleidoscopic cinematic experience of what a jazz club might be. And I was only about 8 or 9, but I just loved it. Now my youngest son is into music, and actually I gave him my Aristocat LP, which I'd drawn all over, not on the actual vinyl, but obviously on all the sleeves that you put the records in. And I'd done these copies of the Aristocats and stuff.
You know what did that for me back in the days? It was Peter and the Wolf. And the teacher was like, this instrument is this animal and this instrument is this animal. And that's like the first time I can remember being prompted to use my imagination.
It's, again, the language, isn't it? It is wonderful when you can, and, you know, if you can get children, actually, we're all children still. And I just love the idea of, you know, families going there to, hopefully, to Freedom Plaza. And it's not an ageist thing. It's everybody is very welcome.
I do want to say, like, I think it's wonderful that it's free. And not only that it's free, that it's 6 acres. Like, that is huge. That's over 4 football fields.
Well, that's the generosity of the Soliev Foundation. I mean, it's the first, of that scale, public free installation of that scale. I mean, it is that they have been incredibly generous to put this on. And I think, you know, part of the joy for me is the fact that it's, as you said earlier, it's close to the UN building. You know, we are in a really tough time at the moment in the world. We've got a major war going on in Europe. We've just come out of COVID. We need to start to look at each other and stop, you know, try and see what we should be doing, connecting humanity, not fighting. I mean, we've got a climate crisis, for goodness sake. Rather than spending money on weaponry, we should be spending it on healing the climate, healing the world, feeding, educating. I know these are all cliche,
but they're very necessary. And also, just to your point, giving us more reasons to connect with one another and stop putting out so many things that just separate us. We need to come together and be more understanding, more empathetic, more compassionate, to be able to communicate and move together to solve these problems. Otherwise, if we're ostracized and separated, we're not going to solve anything, because it takes all of us.
You know, absolutely. I couldn't agree with you more. It's the interesting thing is we look at the differences always, but we have so many similarities. And if we could just flip it around and see that we actually are, you know, I do a lot of traveling and meet lots of people from many, many countries in the world. And what I always find incredible is how similar we all are. Even though we speak different languages or we come from different cultures, fundamentally, we're the same. And most of us want to get on. You know, 99.9% of the world's population actually does not want a war. But for some reason, the minority is always the ones who seem to be driving the negative side of the human condition. When are we going to wake up and start to look at each other and be connected and start to appreciate one another's company? Because it's such a struggle to keep on saying, come together, but actually this is a time to celebrate. I'm hoping that at the very least, this installation will allow people come together to forget the awfulness that's going on and bring their families, bring each other, and just be happy and joyful, and then go away, go home with a smile on your face and a warmer heart, and hopefully it will have done its job. If it does that, then that's amazing.
With something this big, let's just say that 6 acres, with 17,000 pieces of fiber optic cable, and can you talk about the teamwork that needs to happen in order to make this idea tangible? How everyone has to get along? Like, how do you choose team members? What are the logistics? Are there any points of troubleshooting that needs to occur? Is it similar to like what we talked about with the Christmas lights? Like, if one doesn't work, then they all don't work. How does all that work?
Lots of good questions there. And as with anything, and something that occurred to me a long, long time ago, you can't do anything in isolation. It's impossible. Even if you're an artist working in paint, with brushes and paint and a canvas, you have to say, where does that paint and canvas come from? You can't live without food. If you can't live without food, you're not going to be a painter.
Right.
Where does your food come from? If you really think about it, fundamentally, you're connected. And if you go on to an atomic level, the world is just a bunch of dancing atoms. I mean, if you could go down to that world. So think of the world as a cloud of interactive atoms. With this installation, there are so many people that touch it. There's manufacturers that make the raw materials, then they get processed. Then you've got designers, then they come into our studio. Then we have to prototype everything and make sure that and then put it all together. And then we have all the people, for example, in New York, who are helping put on this installation. There are the engineers who sort out the ground and the landscape. There are the people who are organizing all the logistics. There's, the Solev Foundation, who are funding all of this. Michael Hirschman, who's the CEO, incredible man. He's a visionary, and he's the one who kind of got this all going. It's many, many people coming together. And when people say to me, "Oh, Bruce, that was wonderful," and I go, no, you're getting it wrong. It's literally thousands of people will touch this. And you don't have an artwork without an audience. And therefore, you've got to include all the people who actually will come and see it. It's wrong to think that any one of us are responsible purely for anything. You can't exist without other people. And this is my point about the earlier. We should be looking at how we can help each other more, look at the positive parts of connection rather than trying to cut the ties and destroy connections, which is really what war and negative behavior does. But it won't win, because the natural way of the world is to be connected. These crazy people who are trying to stop people being connected, they'll never survive. It will never work, because the nature of this world, of this existence, is connection.
What has been the most important lesson you've learned so far?
I think the most important lesson isn't to take yourself too seriously. And probably the most exciting thing for me, because I'm aware so much of time and the passing of time, is the next thing you're going to do. Because actually, that's the journey. That's what keeps me relevant. It keeps me excited. It keeps me hopefully young at heart. I'm so excited by the future and I'm trying to pack in as much as I can in this one short life, because when you die, that's all you have to leave. And actually, if you could leave a little bit of joy, as my parents left me, and dear friends who've already passed, that is what you pass on to others. And that never dies. Love does not die. It's the only thing in existence which goes on forever and ever. And if you can pass on a little bit of that and joy, then you've done a good thing in your life. It's been a life that has meaning to it.
I have a nephew. His name is Kush, and yesterday he was asking me about what is the importance of journaling, and it dawned on me I might as well ask you, because you're an avid journaler. Can you talk about the importance of writing it down and making things happen?
Yeah, I started it journaling, keeping diaries, because when I was about 15, I had an art teacher who gave us all these books, A5 size books, and said, just put anything in there. Don't be self-conscious about it. Just put anything that comes to mind or inspires you. It must be a habit. You can't be, you're not going to do it every day, and it's not like you sort of make it a chore.
Right.
So I use it as a shorthand. If I do a little scribble and write a few letters, a few words, it will remind me. I can open a book that I've had 30, 40 years ago, and I can read a sentence and I can pretty sure tell you a story about where I was at that time. It's my shorthand. It's my memory in a sense. And I never knew this when I was writing these notes, but I was writing a lot of anecdotes, whether, it was about an experience or a feeling or a place that was, when I go back to those moments, I realized that many of them were joyful experiences when I felt connected with the world. And actually, that's what, I didn't know what I was going to make art about. And I always felt worried and thought, what's the point of it? As I said earlier, it's a self-indulgent activity. But then I realized that actually, if you feel joy, write it down. Because, and when I say draw it, write it, record it in some way, because later on, you might not know how you're going to deal with that, how you're going to express it. But it took me 40 years to find the language to express the thoughts. And I never thought I would. I didn't push it. It just happened. I woke up one day and it started to happen. And I realized I had a language that I hadn't recognized. I'd always wanted to be a painter, and I loved painting, but I was pretty terrible at it. But then I realized that I had another language, which was my interest in materials and light and so forth. And that's why I ended up doing what I'm doing. And I say the same to my kids. I say, look, find the language and don't hunt for it. It will come to you.
You know what, Bruce, talking to you, this has been an absolute pleasure. And so many times throughout this conversation, you reminded me, and your philosophies of connecting to the world, it just kept taking me back to one of my favorite books, which is The Alchemist, where he finds himself finding the language of the world and getting to the soul of the world. And it seems to me that you tap into that when you create, like you've tapped into that language to the world and creating those connections, whether you're overseas or here, like your work connects with the people.
Well, that's an incredibly wonderful thing to say. I would, to even be mentioned in that. Many people have inspired me, and I just do my little bit of, like we all do. We all try and if we can all add to that language about tapping into the world, because it is all there. It's deep under the soil. It's in the sky. I am being whimsical in one sense, but I really truthfully believe it. And it's called spirit, I think. And it's probably called the human spirit. And we've got to keep the human spirit glowing and pass it on to each other and keep reminding us there is light out there. And that's so important.
And I couldn't agree more. Bruce, let's wrap it up. The exhibition Field of Light at Freedom Plaza is happening in the fourth quarter, the winter. We don't have a set date just yet, but I'll put all that information on the website. It's 6 acres spanning from 34th Street to 41st Street, east of 1st Avenue, right by the UN. If you're in New York, just look for the UN and you'll see the line, I'm sure, if there's even a line, because it's so big. Is there anything you would like to add before we get out of here?
The iteration of Field of Light, it's a kind of window box of flowers for New York, or illuminated flowers, because you think of New York as a huge, huge city, and you can't take it on. But what you can do is create a little bouquet, a window box. It will sit nestled between those buildings that surround it and hopefully light up and bring a bit of joy to everybody.
Thank you, Bruce. Sincerely.
Lovely to talk to you, and I look forward to meeting you at the exhibition.
100%. Talk to you soon. Have a great week.
Yeah, and you. Take care.
Peace.